And so just to kind of see the difference in how these objects are treated by the print function, if I try and print a data frame like storms df, then what happens is the entire data frame gets printed to the screen. So this is, well, at least it hit in Colab, it hit its maximum output here, which is like close to 8,000 lines. It didn't print the entire thing. It it has like 20,000 observations in this data frame. So it printed the first like 8,000 rows and then gave up. But yeah, nobody's going to want to look at 8,000 rows of raw data. The whole point of us being a data analyst is we don't want to look at the raw data, but we want to look at reasonable ways of summarizing the data visually or maybe with statistics. So this is not a useful way of summarizing the data. If you were working with like a different software like RStudio and you ran a command like this, it might open up a pane where you could look at the entire data frame in a different window, and that might not be so bad. But if I'm working with this in Colab, I am never going to want to print a large data frame to the screen because it prints the entire data frame. So when you're submitting your work to me, please don't ever print out more than like 20 rows of a data frame to the screen. It is not a useful summary to provide a viewer of your document. It's just way too much information and way too much noise. So this is really not useful output to look at. So I'm going to clear that output. If I take away the print feature from around it, and I just say Storm's data frame, we've been doing this. Colab will also print this to the screen in a different way than above. It prints it, I think, maybe a little bit nicer. Excuse me. Um, it prints some summary information on the top. We can see it's a data frame and how many rows and columns are in the data frame. We can also see how each variable, what data type each variable is. That's useful. I did not see that in the print command for the data frame, but this also prints out like the first 30 rows of the data frame. I get dot, dot, dots, and then the last 30 rows of the data frame. This is also like way too much information to look at, I think, to be particularly helpful. We've seen that there are commands that are much more helpful, like the structure command, right, would be a much more preferred way of summarizing the output. This is much easier to look at for a person, and I don't think there's really anything that I would get from the previous output of like 80 rows that I wouldn't get from looking at just this one output that I'm looking at here. On the other hand, if we were looking at the tibble, so remember storms is being stored as a tibble, then I can clarify that if you don't believe me. So this is being stored as a tibble, that if I just print the storm's tibble, we get a nice enhanced print. For the data frame, it printed like 8,000 rows of the data frame. It was crazy. It was not very pretty. It was way too much information. Here we get an enhanced print. It gives us a condensed print, just what can fit on the screen, just the first 10 rows. It doesn't print out all of the variables in the data frame because it couldn't fit them all. It said there were two variables that I had to truncate off because I couldn't fit them on the screen, but at least it tells us what they are and how they're being stored. So that is one really nice thing. Just the print function works much nicer with tibbles than it does with data frame. So I think that is maybe one of the nicest things about tibbles. We can customize the print function. So I can say print n equals 5. And rather than printing the default 10 rows, we can customize how many rows of data are printed. So this prints 5 rows. I can say print 50 rows, print 2 rows. I can customize how many rows I want to print. I could not do that with this command over here. If I try and print out n equals 5 rows of a data set, or excuse me, of a data frame, it gives me an error over here. So this feature only works with tibbles and it does not work with data frames. But for a tibble, I can specify how many rows I want to print. For a tibble, I can specify how wide I want each of the columns to be. So in this print that I'm looking at right now, it kind of set the width of the columns so that it could display a good amount of them. But notice like the status column, it truncated tropical depression so that it could display some of these other columns over here. If I wanted to see the full width of all of the columns displayed on the screen, I could set the width to infinity, and this prints out all of the columns to their full width, for example. And this, so I can see the full width of the status, and I can also see the full width of tropical storm force diameter, the two variables that were truncated in the previous print screen command. And we could customize this to any width that we wanted to. So here I just set the entire width to 20, and this is 20 characters wide. I can set the width of the print to 200, and now this is 200 characters wide, and so on. So the print function just has, it's much more customizable with tibbles than it is with data frames, is the point that I'm trying to make. So when we're working in the tidyverse, it is much more preferable to work with tibbles than it is to work with data frames. You can check to see what type of object you have, whether it's a tibble or a data frame, using the class function, like here. And if your class is tbl_df, that means you have a tibble. And if you ever have a data frame, like Storm's df was a data frame, and you want to convert it to a tibble, then the command is as tibble. And what you would do is you would enter your data frame name. You would put it inside the as tibble command and then store it to your new thing. And now I can check the class of this output with the class function. And we can see this took Storm's data frame, which was just a data frame, and now converted it to a tibble. And here I can convert it back to a data frame using the as data frame if I wanted to. But notice the as data frame has dots in the function. The as tibble function has an underscore in its function. But we can convert to tibble with the as tibble function. Okay, so I will stop this video here. In the next video, I can talk about some other differences that tibbles and data frames have in R. Thanks.